Panning to move the motion.
Thank you, Sir George, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship this morning. And the subject that I asked for this debate on is the accountability in the NHS. We, as a nation, love our NHS, and they do a fantastic job for us day in, day out. But like any human being or any organisation, sometimes they make mistakes. And when they make mistakes, invariably, the process of trying to just get an apology or that mistake rectified is, within the NHS, a complete bureaucratic nightmare. I have a couple of examples that I'd like to raise, and I have permission from at least one of them to use their name, which I'm probably not going to do because I'm going to pass correspondence yet again to the Minister. I appreciate that the Minister is not accountable in his department for this particular subject, and the Minister is on the floor of the House answering questions. I thank him for his comments as to why she wasn't here. But actually, we are here in Parliament to speak up for those that can't sometimes speak up for themselves. And when something goes wrong, you would think, Sir George, that we would be able to get answers for our constituents and actually get things rectified. But within the NHS, there is a process of lack of ministerial accountability, which I'll come on to in a moment, and also a process of a complaints procedure which eventually ends up at the Ombudsman, but actually takes forever. And there is a feeling within my constituency, and I'm sure it may be in the case, when these things do go wrong, that actually the longer they can delay it, the more these people will just accept what's happened, or frankly, in some cases, sadly, just not be around anymore. And for their families and loved ones, I think this short debate is really very, very important. For me, probably the most dramatic of ones, not in the physical situation of the surgery that took place, but actually the effect on someone's life, which is probably the most important thing, was when my constituent, believe it or not, in 1986, when the NHS decided he needed an operation on his nose. And the operation that took place was not the operation that was supposed to have happened. So I'll use the language, it was botched. Like, that wasn't probably intentional, that was a mistake, but that has had, to this day, detrimental effects on the quality of life for my constituent. And he tried to go through the process of getting it rectified. I've tried to go through the process of finding out what's going on. He's been pushed from pillar to post by different trusts, UCL and West Arts Trust. I've written to the Minister over the years, not this Minister, previous Ministers, to be told Ministers don't interfere in individual cases. I accept that. But when we get to a situation where we've got nowhere else to go, ministerial accountability is important. Of course I will.
Tim Farron.
And not least for the sensitivity of the issues that he's raising. Ministers have sought under multiple government of all colours to keep NHS operational matters at arm's length. Would he agree with me that this does reduce accountability and effectiveness? I'm thinking more generally about the current huge backlog in cancer diagnosis and treatment. I don't see any direct and urgent government intervention. Does he think this is partly as a result of the lack of direct operational accountability for ministers to the service?
Mike Panning.
Intervention. And I think we've seen during COVID that actually ministers can step in. Prime ministers can step in. And when sometimes things get really bad, they will step in and do that. But when we talk about individual cases, then they can't. In the particular case I'm referring to, I ended up writing to the Minister to be told to go to the Ombudsman, got fobbed off by the Ombudsman after we'd been to the Trust three, four times. Then I wrote again to the Minister, this is over the courses of years, to be told to go to take legal advice. And now this particular person has been told, go back to your GP and get them to re-refer you if you've still got problems. Well, we've got problems because they didn't do the operation properly in the first place. And the long-term effect, on, as I said earlier, on the quality of life of this gentleman has had a massive effect. Now, this is not the only case. I've been here nearly 18 years. I worked for a Member of Parliament for many years before that. Every constituency gets this sort of case brought before their MP. I have another situation. If we can remember last summer, Sir George, in the middle of the heat wave in July, when the temperatures were unbelievably high, I had a very, very vulnerable young lady was brought in for a scan at my local hospital. She is really the most vulnerable young lady. Her mother cares for her 24/7. She has carers in. She is a wheelchair user or bed bound. She was left on a trolley in the heat for 5 hours when her ambulance didn't arrive. So when I contacted the trust and said, what happened there, they blamed the ambulance trust. When you contact the ambulance trust, they say, no, it was cancelled by the trust, it was their fault. So George, I don't care whose fault it was the NHS's fault. That a very vulnerable young lady, she had no drink, she had no food, she was very, very ill. The ambulance trust actually said that the return journey was cancelled because she was so poorly on the trolley. Well, yes, she was so poorly because she'd been left there for 5 hours. Trying to get to the bottom of what happens within the NHS when something goes wrong. We've seen these terrible situations in maternity. We've seen terrible situations in other trusts around the country. Surely if we could address some of these problems early on, instead of the drawbridge being brought up and saying, you have to go through this massive complaints procedure where you've got to complain 3 times before you go to the Ombudsman. The Ombudsman will say it's out of time. If you're not careful, you can't go to court because that's out of time. Is that the way that we want an NHS to be seen by the public that love the NHS? The NHS sees the NHS as a single entity. As MPs, we understand, and I was a shadow minister in health for 4.5 years, it's not a single entity, it's a set of silos where everybody passes the buck back and forth from. But actually, if I could just complete this point, Sir George, and then I'll happily give way. What we need is a joined up thinking. And the answer is not when colleagues like myself write to ministers to say, nothing to do with me, Gov, pass it down the line to the Ombudsman, pass it down to a lawyer, because that surely costs more money, but actually doesn't put the NHS in a particularly good light with my constituents that have had their operations botched.
Can I congratulate, first of all, the
Jim Shannon.
member for Hemel Hempstead bringing this forward. He talks about silos, and I just want to give him an example of that for my constituents. Many await the care packages in order to be released from hospital to get home and get better. At the same time, you have those, on the other hand, there are people waiting urgently for hospital beds and can't get one. So does the Right Honourable Member agree that there must be greater communication between the trust managers and the social workers to ensure the efficiency of care in the community, which will free up the hospital beds and allow people to be treated quicker? In other words, do away with the silos and have it coordinated.
I thank my honourable friend, and I agree with him completely on that. And if you go to my local hospital, and my colleague from close to my constituency, right next to my constituency, goes to Watford Hospital and looks on the boards, see whether or not medically they could be discharged. They can, and they can't because there is lack of joint, I think. But this is different, Sir George, with all due respect. This is about when the NHS may or may not have made a mistake, to address that mistake absolutely full on at the start. Don't actually draw up a drawbridge and go through this long drawn out complaints procedure, this long drawn out procedure of going to the Ombudsman. And for a minister to come back to a colleague and fellow MP and say, perhaps this person needs to take legal advice, I think completely and utterly is not the attitude that we should be having towards people that have done the right thing. The NHS has said that they should have an operation. The NHS has mucked up, botched, I'll use that word under privilege, and at the same time, that person's life has been detrimentally affected for years and years to come. Now, I know the Minister is not the Minister responsible, but I guarantee the Minister, because we're all constituency MPs, I guarantee before he was in this position, that he has had people, his surgeries, or people that have written to him saying, this happened to me within the NHS, what can you help me, what can you do to help me do something about that? And somewhere along the line, perhaps if this little short debate we're having today nudges the Department of Health and nudges government, which I was part of in 7 ministerial departments, to actually look at ministerial oversight. Of course.
Daisy Cooper.
A fantastic speech. Would he agree with me that in light of the shocking reports this week from Byline Times about the number of sexual abuses and rapes that have occurred in hospital settings, that to improve accountability in the NHS, we need the government not only to urgently repeal the 5-year rule, which limits some people from making complaints to the NHS, but we actually need to have clear, systematic and consistent data collection on all sexual misconduct across all hospital settings?
Mike Penning.
As usual, on most things, I completely agree with my honourable friend. We don't agree on everything, but 99% we do. I think this is the crux of the matter. There are two real issues here. For lots of these patients, including the gentleman I'm referring to in the first case that goes way back into the 80s, his mental as well as his physical health has not been great. For lots of people that may well have had the extreme examples that my honourable friend has alluded to here, they may be mentally affected in a way which I could never understand, and many of the people in this room probably can't understand. So have a block exclusion post 5 years seems so arbitrary to me in the modern world that we live in, that I think the government really do have to look at whether or not there should be an arbitrary rule. And perhaps leave it to others to decide, rather than the government setting down the regulation on that, as to the exceptional circumstances that may well have been in place. Now, trusts do have the powers, delegated powers, much more powers than actually I think they should have in delegated terms, and I know the new Act is going to help that. But it doesn't take into consideration the points that we've tried to raise this morning in this debate. And I think, Sir George, if we had this debate on the floor of the House, I think we'd have a full chamber of colleagues not running down the NHS, but actually saying, when things go wrong, we need to address them. Now, I was the police minister, and there was a big mistake under my portfolio, and I went before the House and explained that there were mistakes made on the funding formula and put my hands up. And I took a lot of flack for that, but actually, it was a way, I hope, that we could address things going forward in this sort of area. With the NHS being such a massive organisation, but an organisation that the public want to have so much trust in, it must be better if we could address the issues at the start of the complaint, rather than ministers actually saying to me, which I was really very shocked when I said, and Sir George, just to give anybody that's listened to this debate, the minister didn't write the letter. The minister was written by her officials in this particular case, who are in a position that they want desperately to defend the NHS. The complaint wasn't about the NHS in general. The complaint was about a specific. And if we can try and address that, and we are all here as members of Parliament because we're supposed to represent the taxpayer. Representation through taxation. If I can't represent my constituents in that way inside the NHS without being told to go to the Ombudsman. I know how to go to the Ombudsman. I've been here a very long time, so I think I'm capable of working that one out. I'm also capable of working out that we're outside the time on the 5-year rule. We need a change of mindset. I don't want ministers to individually say that operation should take place, that shouldn't. The hospital should, literally have this amount of wards. But there has to be ministerial oversight when things go well and when things go wrong. Finally, Sir George, rather than name the constituent who knows I'm very much speaking, and he did give me permission to do it, I think it would be more useful for him and for the minister to keep his name not on the record here. But I will pass, if it's okay with the minister, pass another letter to him, which I hope might have a little bit more positivity when the minister who is responsible rights back to me, rather than saying, please go away and be fobbed off. Thank you, Sir George.
The question is that this House has considered accountability in the NHS. Minister.